The trail had gone quiet hours ago. No birdsong, no wind through the trees. Just the crunch of dried pine needles under Caleb's boots, the slow creak of his pack straps shifting as he moved, and the rhythmic puff of his breath in the cool mountain air. He'd hiked this region before years ago, back when things were still normal. But this trail, this far out, was unfamiliar even to him. That was the point. He wasn't out here for the views, he was looking for answers. It started with a garbled radio call 3 days earlier. A shortwave operator in the next county had picked up something strange. Just a few seconds of broken transmission, full of static and panic. A woman's voice, frantic, desperate, something about a baby. Then a thud. Silence. That alone might have been dismissed. But the next day, a ranger on patrol passed through an old unofficial campsite nearly 10 miles off the grid. He reported signs of recent use-scattered gear, still warm ashes in the fire ring, but not a soul in sight. No IDs, no tracks heading out. Just one thing left behind that gave him pause, a small blue crib. Empty. By the time the ranger returned with backup, a thunderstorm had torn through the area. Most of the scene was wiped clean. They didn't have much to go on, and the trail was already cold. But it stuck with Caleb. Something didn't sit right. And he knew this wilderness better than most, so here he was, hiking in alone. The light was starting to fade when he first smelled it, faint but distinct smoke. Not wood smoke either. Something acrid, electrical, maybe. He paused, adjusted his pack, and moved cautiously forward. That's when he saw the first sign of life. A small tan shape darted across the path, then stopped a few yards ahead. A puppy, no more than 6 months. Old, thin, matted, wide-eyed. It stood frozen, staring at him, chest heaving, legs braced like it wasn't sure whether to run or fight. Caleb knelt slowly and held out a hand. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. "You lost." The pup didn't move, just stared. He reached into his side pouch, pulled out a strip of dried venison, and tossed it gently to the ground. Still no movement, but the dog's eyes followed it. Caleb waited a full minute past. Then cautiously, the puppy stepped forward, inch by inch, grabbed the meat and darted back again, chewing furiously. "Good boy," Caleb murmured. "Or girl. Hard to tell with all that dirt." When he stood, the dog didn't run. It watched him, then turned, looking back the way it had come. It barked, once, sharp, urgent. Then again it wasn't just barking, it was calling him. Caleb hesitated. He was hours past where the ranger had found that abandoned site, but the smoke, the dog, something was still out here. He followed. The puppy darted through brush and over fallen logs with surprising speed, pausing every so often to glance back and make sure he was keeping up. Caleb's legs ached, and his shoulders throbbed from the weight of his gear, but he kept going. The forest was thicker here, older, darker. The last light of day filtered through the canopy in long gold fingers. Then the trees opened up. It wasn't much of a clearing, just a patch of flattened earth surrounded by dense pine, but in the middle of it was a tent, tattered, faded blue. One corner had collapsed, and a tarp fluttered weakly in the breeze. A folding camp chair lay on its side nearby, half covered in pine needles. A cracked lantern rested next to it, and off to the side, barely visible in the fading light, was the crib, the same one the ranger had described. Blue plastic, worn. A small stuffed bear lay next to it, damp from the evening dew. The puppy trotted over and sat beside it like a sentinel. Caleb, but approached slowly, scanning the site. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just ... abandonment, left in a hurry maybe, or worse, someone didn't have time to leave at all. He crouched beside the crib. No blanket, no clothes, just the toy. He didn't want to admit how fast his heart was racing. "Where's your people, huh?" he asked the puppy, who just stared at him with wide, wet eyes. Then he saw something odd. Underneath the crib, barely sticking out, was a scrap of fabric. He pulled it free, a child's onesie, pale pink stained with something brownish-red, not mud. He stood and turned toward the tent. Every instinct told him not to go in there, not without backup. But something else tugged at him in urgency he couldn't explain. He unzipped the flap. Empty. A few blankets, an old torn-up diaper bag, an insulated bottle, and taped to the inside wall of the tent, yellowed and creased, was a piece of notebook. Paper. It had one sentence written on it, scrawled in shaky, blocky letters: "Please take care of her." Caleb swallowed. His throat felt tight. He turned back toward the crib, but it was still empty, and the dog suddenly was growling, low, quiet, but unmistakable. It wasn't looking at him, it was looking at the trees, and whatever it saw out there was still watching them. Caleb stayed perfectly still. The dog, now crouched low beside the crib, didn't bark again. It didn't need to. The growl told him everything. Something was out there, just past the tree line, watching. He could feel it too, now, crawling across his skin like cold breath on the back of his neck, that unmistakable sensation of being seen. He didn't reach for his weapon right away. That wasn't how he worked. 20 years in the Forest Service had taught him that the worst things out here didn't always come charging in teeth. Sometimes they waited, watched, let you unravel. He lowered himself slowly beside the puppy, scanning the tree line without turning his head. Nothing, no movement, no flash of fur or flicker of light on eyes. but the woods had gone silent again completely. Unnaturally silent, he whispered, mostly for himself. If you're trying to scare me, it's working. The puppy's growl faded, replaced by a whimper. It shifted closer, brushing against his leg like it wanted to be invisible. Something had been here, maybe still was, but whatever it was biding its time. Caleb forced himself to move. He checked the tent again, more carefully this time. The bottle was still half full, lukewarm and sour-smelling. The blankets were crumpled, not carefully folded. The diaper bag was half open with one sleeve of a baby jacket poking out. Whoever had been here hadn't packed up, they'd left. Mid-motion. Something had driven them out, or taken them. But if that was true, why was the crib still here, and the dog, and the note? Please take care of her. Caleb turned the words over in his head. It didn't make sense. If someone left a baby behind, terrifying as that idea was, why would they do it like this? No formula, no food, no protection. Just a note taped to a crumbling tent wall and a puppy that hadn't left its post. He moved back to the crib and crouched again. There were faint impressions in the dirt beneath it, small ones. Barefoot could have been from a toddler. He followed the faint path with his eyes just a few steps, leading away from the crib and into the grass before they vanished beneath a layer of fallen pine needles. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just gone. The dog stood suddenly, ears pricked, its head turned, not toward the trees this time, but toward a narrow path he hadn't noticed before, overgrown and thin like a game trail, almost invisible. Then, without a sound, it started walking. Not running. Walking. Deliberate, steady. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to follow it, not anymore. His gut twisted with the kind of warning that didn't come from fear, it came from knowing too much. Every instinct said to radio for help, mark the location, and wait for daylight, but he was already in it now, too far in, and something about that note, those desperate, uneven letters, had wedged itself deep inside his chest. He followed. The trail narrowed quickly, winding through thick underbrush. The dog stayed just ahead, glancing back every so often as if making sure he hadn't vanished. The light was almost gone now, the sky above bleeding from gray to black. He flicked on his headlamp and kept moving. 15 minutes in, the air changed. He noticed it all at once. The temperature dropped. The scent of moss and pine gave way to something heavier, metallic, like old iron, and under that, something faintly sweet, almost floral, but wrong. Too strong, too cloying. He slowed, scanning the trees. Then he saw a cabin, at least what was left of one. It looked ancient. Roof partially caved in, windows broken, door hanging on one rusted hinge. Vines crept up the walls, and moss clung to every wooden surface like skin. It had been forgotten a long time ago. The puppy stopped at the edge of the clearing and sat silent, watching Caleb approach the cabin slowly. He didn't know what he expected. A squatter, a shelter someone had stumbled into during a storm. Maybe the baby. No, not a baby now. Not after days alone in the wild. Maybe she was here somehow. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, it was worse than outside. Damp, cold. The smell was stronger now, like decayed flowers and rusted metal. His light swept across shattered furniture, mold-stained walls, and a collapsed stone hearth. But it was the far wall that made him stop. Carved into the wood, deep, almost gouged, were words, not all legible, some scratched over others. But one line stood out. She never cried, not even once. Goosebumps crawled up Caleb's arms. He moved further in, stepping over rotted boards. In the far corner, beneath a collapsed beam, lay a small pile of cloth. Old, dirty, a blanket maybe. He knelt, lifted it gently. A child's doll, filthy, waterlogged, one eye missing, and beneath it a bracelet, the kind you get from a hospital, infant-sized, faded print, barely visible. But he could make out the name. Ilara. He stared at it. That name hadn't been mentioned in any report. No missing child alert, no APB. No one had said a word about a baby named Ilara, yet here was a hospital bracelet, and a note asking anyone to take care of her. Caleb sat back on his heels. Something didn't fit. There was a gap here, a blank space in the middle of the story. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. The kind that's placed there on purpose. He stood, suddenly needing to breathe back outside. The dog was gone. He looked around, spun a slow circle. Nothing. And then a sound, high, thin, faint as a breeze. A baby's laugh somewhere deep in the trees. Not a scream, not a cry, a laugh. Soft and clear, like wind chimes in the dark. Caleb turned toward it, heart-pounding light flicking through the woods. The laugh came again, and this time it wasn't alone. Behind it, footsteps, not rushing, not running, pacing him, keeping his rhythm, and somewhere out there, the dog barked once, alarmed before going silent, completely silent. The forest had swallowed them both. The laugh echoed once more, fainted this time, but unmistakable. And then it stopped. Caleb stood frozen on the edge of the clearing, the broken cabin behind him, the dense black forest ahead. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, to mark the coordinates and get out, call it in, let someone else with more gear, more men, come search these woods in daylight. That was the logical thing. But logic didn't explain the laughter. It didn't explain the dog vanishing without a sound, or the note, or the bracelet in his pocket, with the name of a child no one seemed to know existed. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, reached for his flashlight, and pressed forward into the trees. The underbrush grew thicker the deeper he went. Brambles pulled at his pant legs, and branches clawed across his jacket. He moved carefully now, not just for footing, but because he no longer trusted the forest to play fair. Something was different tonight. Something had changed. It wasn't just the dark or the silence. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, like the woods were folding in on themselves, rearranging the path behind him the way a dream does when you try to turn around. 100 yards in, he found the dog. It was standing in the middle of a narrow clearing, staring up into the trees. Not at him, not even blinking. Just watching something high above, where the canopy swallowed the sky. "Hey," Caleb whispered. "You okay, girl?" The dog didn't move. Not a twitch. He took a step closer, his boots crunching softly over brittle leaves. "What is it?" And then, slowly, the dog turned its head toward him. Not fast, not startled, just deliberate. Its eyes looked different in the flashlight beam, glassy, unfocused, like it had seen something no living thing should ever have to see. It wind once, barely a sound, and then it sat down, waiting. Caleb lifted the flashlight and followed its gaze upward. There, caught in the crook of a high branch, was fabric, blue, torn. Something small dangled beside it, plastic, faded pink, a pacifier. His stomach dropped. He moved back without realizing it, heart thudding so hard it made his vision pulse. That branch had to be 20 feet up. There was no ladder, no way to climb, and no earthly reason for a baby's belongings to be up there, not without someone putting them there. He turned in a slow circle, sweeping the light across the surrounding trees, bark, moss, shadow. Then movement. Just to his left, too fast to catch clearly. A shape, no sound, just a flicker. He spun, flashlight up, but the beam caught only dust and pine needles. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't do this to me." But he wasn't sure who he was talking to. The dog stood again. This time, it didn't look back. It started walking, not toward the cabin, and not deeper into the forest either, but along a barely visible path, half covered in fallen leaves and old roots. Caleb followed. They walked for almost 20 minutes. The temperature dropped again. His breath fogged in front of him now, hanging in the air like mist. He was deep enough into the forest that there were no more sounds of the outside world. No planes, no wind. Even his footsteps felt quieter here, swallowed by the earth before they could fully echo. And then the trees ended. Abruptly. A steep embankment sloped downward, revealing a sunken meadow below. Moonlight, thin and gray, lit up the clearing just enough to make out the shapes scattered across it. Tents. 3 of them. Old, faded, sun-bleached and wind-worn, they formed a kind of loose triangle around a blackened fire pit, and in the center of it all, a wooden cradle, not a crib, a cradle like something from 100 years ago. Caleb descended slowly, light held low, heart pounding. The puppy stayed at the edge of the tree line, tail tucked between its legs. He reached the first tent and knelt to peek inside. Empty. Just a few mildewed blankets and the remains of a tin can, long rusted through. No footprints, no recent activity. The second tent was the same. The third had something different, a photo pinned inside the flap, yellowed, water-damaged, but the faces were still visible. A man, a woman, a baby in the woman's arms, and sitting next to them, just barely in frame, was the dog, younger, cleaner, same white patch above the eye. Caleb stared at it, stunned. This wasn't just any dog. This was her dog, the woman who left the note, the woman whose name no one seemed to know. But there was something else in the photo, to something that didn't register at first. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, was a shape in the shadows. Tall, thin, almost indistinct. It could have been a tree, or it could have been watching. Caleb backed out of the tent, breath coming faster now. He turned toward the cradle in the center of the clearing. It was empty, but only just. He could see the faint imprint, where something small had been lying. Dust settled in the shape of a curled infant. He didn't understand how something so old could still hold that shape. Then the air changed. Again. Not colder. Heavier, like it was pressing down on him from all sides. And then, from the trees behind him, a voice, soft, fragile. He turned fast, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. No one there, but he'd heard it, he was sure. A woman's voice, low and soothing, as if calming a child. He spun back toward the cradle, and his heart stuttered. There in the cradle was the doll, the same one he'd found in the cabin. It hadn't been there a moment ago, but now it was, propped up, smiling its crooked smile, one eye hanging loose, and around its neck, tied loosely in a frayed pink ribbon, was a key. Small, rusted. He didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, he whispered to no one in particular what happened here. The dog wind behind him, low and trembling. Caleb turned back toward the trees, and for the first time that night, he saw her, a woman standing just beyond the moonlight, barefoot, hair hanging loose around her, shoulders holding something in her arms, something wrapped in a pink blanket. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching, and in her arms, nothing moved, not even a breath. Caleb took a step forward, But when he blinked, she was gone, and the woods were silent again. Caleb didn't remember sitting down, but there he was, in the dirt beside the cradle, one hand planted in the cold earth, the other gripping his flashlight like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. His lungs strained for air, like he'd just surfaced from deep water. The forest pressed in around him, not with noise or movement, but with something heavier, a presence still. Alert, the woman, if that's what she was, had vanished without a sound. One blink and she was gone, leaving behind only the image burned into his mind. Bare feet, pale arms, a bundle of pink fabric that didn't move, didn't shift, and those eyes deep, hollow, tired beyond words. The dog was still at the edge of the clearing, pacing now, head low, tail tight against its belly. It kept glancing back the way they'd come, as if urging him to turn around, to leave. But Caleb could not yet. He looked again at the cradle. The doll was still there, still leaning at that awkward angle with its single glass eye catching moonlight like a watchful lens, and tied to it, gently swaying in the night breeze, was the key. This time he reached for it. It was cold to the touch, older than it looked, heavy for its size, the kind of key that belonged to a trunk, or maybe a door meant to stay closed. He pocketed it, half aware of the strange pull in his gut as he did, like something had shifted. Unlocked. Then he stood and took one last glance at the three tense ghosts of a story that refused to explain itself, and turned toward the trees. The dog didn't wait this time. It took off down the path as soon as he moved, darting through the brush with a kind of desperate focus. Caleb followed, limbs stiff from the cold, every sense wound tight. He didn't know what time it was anymore. The sky hadn't changed in what felt like hours, stuck in that gray, frozen twilight just before full dark. They climbed a ridge, followed a creek bed, and passed the same gnarled tree 3 times. He was sure of it. The woods weren't obeying their own rules, but the dog never hesitated, and that was the only anchor he had. Then, just as his legs were beginning to give, the trees opened again, and there it was. A cabin, but not the broken ruin from before. This one was intact, sturdy walls, a sloped tin roof, 2 windows on either side of a thick oak door, smoke rising from a small chimney like a thread of black silk. A lantern glowed from within, warm and flickering. Caleb stopped cold. This cabin hadn't been here yesterday, couldn't have been. No ranger, no satellite map, no record had mentioned a structure out here, and yet here it stood, nestled between the trees like it had grown from the forest itself. The dog didn't go near it. It circled wide, whining, then sat under a pine some distance away and watched. Caleb approached the door, step by slow step. No sound from inside, just the crackle of firelight. He raised his hand and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder still. Nothing, so he tried the handle. It turned easily, and the door creaked open. Inside it was warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth. The room was small, one large table in the center, a worn rug on the floor, 2 wooden chairs, and a long dresser beneath the front window. It was rustic but lived in. Fresh bread sat on a plate near the fire. A blanket was draped over one chair, and in the back corner, almost hidden in shadow, stood a tall wooden wardrobe. Old, ornate, the kind you'd find in your grandmother's attic. He stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and called out softly, "Hello." His voice sounded too loud in the stillness. No reply, no footsteps, no creak of floorboards. He moved through the room, flashlight low. Everything was in place, as if someone had just stepped outside for a minute. A cup of tea sat half finished on the table. A child's shoe, small, pink and worn through at the sole, lay beneath the dresser. He crouched, picked it up. A name was written inside in faded marker. ELARA. His stomach turned. He looked toward the wardrobe. It felt wrong. It felt wrong, but he couldn't stop himself. He crossed the room, every step slower than the last, and stood before it. The key in his pocket felt hot now, as if it knew. He reached for the lock. It slid in smoothly, turned with a soft click, and the door opened. The space inside wasn't deep. Just a few hanging garments, mostly old coats, but on the floor, under a blanket, was something that didn't belong. A journal. He picked it up and flipped to the first page. The handwriting was neat, slanted. The ink had smudged in a few places, but the date was clear. September 13, no year. The entry read, "She came to us 3 nights ago in the storm. No one heard her arrive, but she was there by morning, wrapped in a hospital blanket. No tracks, no car, no name, just a bracelet. We took her in. What else could we do?" He flipped to the next entry. "She doesn't cry, not ever, not when she's hungry, not when she's cold. She just watches all day. Her eyes don't blink like they should." Then another something is in the woods. It stays close. At night I hear it. It doesn't knock. It doesn't try to come in. It waits. And further down the page, scrawled in larger shaky writing, "She is not a child. She is something wearing the shape of one." Caleb shut the book. The warmth of the cabin no longer felt comforting. It felt staged, hollow, like a painting of a room instead of the room itself. He left the wardrobe open and crossed to the window. Dog was still there, but it was standing now, ears up, growling again, and from the trees behind it, movement. Caleb squinted. A-shaped tall. Too tall, not rushing, just watching. Same as before, only this time it was closer, and this time it was coming. Caleb didn't move, not at first. He stood at the window, watching that shape emerge from the tree, slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. It didn't lurch or stumble like something monstrous. It walked like it belonged there, like it always had. The dog backed up, trembling. It didn't bark this time. It didn't run. It just looked at Caleb through the glass, eyes pleading in a way that didn't need words. Whatever was coming had seen it before, and it had survived it barely. Caleb turned from the window. The warmth in the cabin had vanished, like someone had reached in and blown the soul out of the place. The fire still crackled in the hearth, but it gave off no heat. The tea on the table had gone cold. The shadows stretched longer than they should have. He grabbed the journal and shoved it into his coat. Then he crossed to the door and stepped outside. The air bit at him instantly, colder than it had any right to be. The dog ran to his side and pressed against his leg. The shape was closer now. He could make it out better. Tall, yes, but not stretched or grotesque. Human, or nearly. A man, maybe, dressed in something old, frayed at the edges. His face was obscured by shadow, but Caleb could feel his eyes, like ice behind glass. And in his arms was the bundle, the same pink blanket. Still not moving, still not crying. Caleb held his ground, even as his knees wanted to buckle. The man stopped 10 feet away. They stared at each other for what felt like hours. Then the man he was once spoke. "She's not yours to find." The voice didn't come from his mouth, not exactly. It came from around him, like wind carrying words that didn't belong to it. Caleb swallowed. "What is she?" The man tilted his head slightly. "Not yours to keep, not yours to name. I found the camp, the bracelet, the journal. Someone tried to care for her." The thing's eyes didn't blink. "They tried, yes. Did they hurt her?" "No." "Did you?" A pause. "She is what remains," the voice said, softer now, "of what was taken." Caleb's heart pounded. He didn't understand it fully, not yet, but something was starting to settle in his mind, like a puzzle with half the pieces finally locked together. This wasn't about a missing child. This was about something ancient, something that had been here long before tents and maps and ranger stations, something that walked the line between grief and hunger. It didn't steal children. It held them, or what was left of them. "She died out here, didn't she?" Caleb said quietly. The man's head bowed once, a slow nod. "Then why the games? Why all of this?" "To be seen," the voice replied. "To be remembered." The word struck something deep in him, not fear, this time, but sorrow. That's why the dog had stayed. Not to guard, not to protect, to grieve. The woman who left the note had known. She hadn't run in fear. She'd handed her daughter to something she believed could carry her forward when she no longer could. Caleb looked at the bundle again, still not moving, but now he saw something else, not a body, not a ghost or an ache, a memory that refused to vanish. He stepped forward, slowly, until he was just a few feet away. "If she's a memory," he said, "then she deserves more than silence." The man didn't reply. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out the bracelet. Ilara, the name no one had called in days, maybe weeks. He knelt down, held it out. "Let me leave this with her." The man looked down. After a long pause, he stepped closer and bent slightly, allowing Caleb to place the bracelet gently over the edge of the bundle. As soon as it touched the fabric, the weight in the air shifted, lightened. Somehow a breeze stirred through the trees, not cold, just real. The man turned without a word and walked back toward the forest. The blanket still cradled in his arms, but as he reached the edge of the trees, something changed. The bundle moved, not much, just the slightest shift, like it had exhaled. Then it vanished into the shadows. Gone. The dog let out a low, broken whine, and Caleb stood there, feeling the world right itself, not fully, but enough. They made their way out of the woods by dawn. The sky was pink and gold by the time they reached the ranger trail, and the dog, still quiet, still watchful, walked beside him every step of the way. Back at the station, the other rangers didn't know what to make of his story. There were no signs of the cabin, no tents, no cradle, nothing in the spot he marked on the map but trees and silence. But Caleb didn't argue. He knew what he saw. More importantly, he knew what he felt. He kept the journal, locked it away in his desk. And he kept the dog too. He named her Elsie. She never strayed far from him again. Weeks passed, then months. The forest turned gold, and then bare. And one afternoon, in early spring, Caleb returned to the clearing. He didn't expect to find anything. But there, nestled between two stones, was the bracelet. Still clean, still readable. Elarate. Picked it up, held it for a moment, and smiled. Then he placed it back down, not buried, not hidden, just remembered, because some stories aren't meant to be solved, only carried.